So, fundamental rights of the Constitution are essentially what are commonly known as human rights. When it comes to trial and sort of arrest, there are lots of things in the Constitution that detail the rights people have. So, one of the main ones is Article 10, which is safeguards as to arrest and detention, Article 10A, right to fair trial, Article 13, protection against self-incrimination, and more specifically, with the topic at hand, it is Article 14, which talks about unavoidability of dignity of man. Specifically, no person shall be subjected to torture for the purpose of procuring evidence. Now, even though we have all of these fundamental rights within our constitution, the main problem becomes the fact that people are unaware of these rights or how they are enforced and used. So, in order for these rights to actually be used, they need to be incorporated into our law and our statutes, such as the Pakistan Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Qanun-e-Shahadat, the police order, the police rules, and other laws like that. Now, one of the main problems with actually enforcing these rights when it comes to arrest and detention is that a lot of people are unaware of them. Mostly because law enforcement agencies and others involved in the arrest don't actually tell the person what their rights are. So, taking the topic at hand, one of the biggest problems in Pakistan is that torture hasn't been criminalized in order to actually give effect to all of the articles of the constitution that I stated before. In a study that we conducted, we found 1,867 cases of torture which were in the form of medical legal certificates by the District Medical Standing Board in Faisalabad between the years 2006 to 2012. Of those, 1,424 cases were confirmed cases of torture. Of that sample, 58 were children and 134 were women. When we were interviewing a lot of the victims, one of the things that they stated was they had no idea that things like sleep deprivation, cultural humiliation were also torture. One of the things that we actually need to do in terms of moving forward, in terms of enabling people to better understand in order to ensure their fundamental rights, especially when it comes to interaction with the police, is that torture by law enforcement agencies is in fact criminalized. Torture is done in many ways. One of the main views that we as a society have about torture is the grotesque and brutal beating of people. Even though that is definitely not condoned and very wrong, one of the things that needs to be understood is that torture comes in many forms, and that it is not just the physical torture, but there is also mental torture. So when you have physical torture, that in itself has elements of the mental trauma, of the abuse of the torture itself. That has led to a lot of people having PTSD, and also it has led to this mass disconnect between law enforcement agencies and its citizens. When it comes to psychological torture, a lot of people don't understand that things like threats of harm to either the person or their loved ones, arresting loved ones, cultural humiliation, abusive language, all also amount to psychological trauma, and through that extent, torture. And one of the other problems is that a lot of people don't realize that this is torture, and that the mental elements of both of these forms of torture are very long lasting and can affect the person both personally and in their work later on as well. One of the victims I once interviewed, he had been tortured so severely that his ankle was no longer workable and didn't heal. When speaking about radicalization, one of the correct way to approach this is to think about how this affects young people and how torture affects young people. The effect that this has is that this has led to a greater disconnect between young people and their trust of law enforcement agencies, to the point where it has led to sort of anger, which has in turn led to losing respect for law enforcement agencies. And because it happens at a young age, this continues on for their life. The other thing is that when young people are arrested, the social stigma and the familiar stigma of being arrested stays with them. And it was also given sort of how news travels fast. This news sort of travels to other members in society, which then also later affects and continues this disconnect. One of the other things is that what we've seen about people who've been tortured is that they are generally young and they're men. This leads to the youth empathizing with those who've been tortured, and they feel that they can put themselves in these people, in the victim's place. So in order to answer both of these questions, one of the things that we need to understand is that there is an urgent need to criminalize torture within Pakistan. True, the police have a strenuous training module that they have to do. It's at different hierarchies of the police as well. You have schools for training within the police structure in the different provinces. However, sensitization during that time is not really effective, because by the time they actually go into employment as police officers, all of that sensitization is lost because of the massive use of torture within the culture of the police. Hence, it's not helpful. We also need to understand that it will only be through criminalizing torture that police officials will actually be held accountable, something that hasn't actually happened yet. And it will be through that will set an example to other police officials and to officers in the future not to continue with methods like this. Another important aspect when we talk about criminalizing torture is the fact that it has to be done by an independent accountability mechanism. That involves people who are not within the police ranks at the moment. Currently, when we talk about accountability of the police in terms of torture, we look at the laws governing the police at the moment, such as the Police Order of 2002. And one of the things that we find in that are that the accountability mechanisms in place, a lot of them have sitting police officials who are part of the accountability mechanism. Not only that, the accountability is towards their employment as civil servants and not criminal prosecutions or criminal liability.
We're really excited to share fantastic content with you
on all the fun topics.
Please subscribe to our channel by
clicking on the subscribe button below.